All right, so before I get started this morning, I wanted to give you guys a just short definition of 4 different things that I'll kind of loop throughout what I'm talking about, so that if I mention one of it, you guys are on the same page as me, so you know what I'm talking about. First of all, there's 4 things, 2 groups of 2 that are similar but a little bit different, hence the reason I want to define them for you. First of all, the definition of evolution, which is small changes occurring over a period of time, and the definition of Darwinism or Darwinian evolution, which is we got here from one single-celled living organism, the origin of species starting at one living cell and creating all of us. That's a little bit different than the basic definition of evolution, which is just small changes. So they are technically 2 different things when used in this particular context. And then on the flip side of that, the intelligent design is the belief or the understanding that there is an odd amount of order to the way things are built and put together. I mean, you look at the human body and it's just like this can't happen by chance. There was intelligence behind the way it's designed, hence the name. And then creationism, which is more often than not a religious belief that we were created. So there are slight differences in the actual definitions of these things. And a lot of these things in certain circles or at different times get inputted for each other when they're not exactly the same. And since all 4 kind of work their way into what I'm talking about, I want to make sure that we're all understanding them the same way so that what I say makes sense. So with that, we live in a country that's based on freedom. We're founded on it. However, if you're like me, then you've probably noticed that nowadays you're free to be openly anything you want except a Christian. And surprisingly, there's nowhere that this is more true than in the field of science. And I'm an odd Christian where I actually really like science. I read it, I study it. I'm not a scientist, I'm not smart enough for all that. But I do follow it, I have a subscription to National Geographic. I know what's going on. So here's a few examples of kind of what I mean, things that happened semi-recently. Dr. Richard von Sternberg was fired from the Smithsonian Institution for questioning Darwinism and saying that intelligent design might explain life. And he was called an intellectual terrorist.
Oh my goodness.
Dr. Caroline Cocker from George Mason University was released from her contracted position for mentioning intelligent design in her biology class and has since been unable to find another job. Dr. Michael Egner, a neurosurgeon, came under attack after saying that doctors did not have to study evolution to become brain surgeons, and he was asked to resign. Professor Robert Marks had his website shut down and his university grants pulled after he was searching for a scientific link between science and intelligent design. Astronomer Dr. Guillermo Garcia was denied tenure after Iowa State University learned that he published a paper on intelligent design. We're living in a time when scientists cannot study intelligent design without fearing the loss of their jobs. Why? When I started college, one of the prerequisites I had to take to cover as a general was a psychology class, just intro to psych, psych 101, whatever. And we watched this. It took 2 days to get through this PBS presentation on the evolution of the human brain. And this presentation was based very heavily on Darwinian science. Here's how, look at the single-celled organism. It basically doesn't have a brain. And then watch as we've evolved from the single-celled organisms up to where we are now and how our brain has changed over as we've jumped from species to species to get to where we are now. And then we had to write a paper on our reaction to this. So in my paper, I was very respectful because, I want to pass. I don't want to take the class over again. So writing that line between just spitting out garbage that the professor wants to hear and standing for what I believe in, I wrote in my paper, the video presented some very interesting information, and I appreciate the research and information, though personally I don't agree with the Darwinian theory of evolution. When I got that paper back, that whole section was crossed off in red marker, And she wrote in the margins, I don't care, evolution's a fact, -1. So not quite to the extent of what you see in like God's not dead, but same type of thing happened to me. And I just sat there and stared at the paper. I'm like, really? Evolution's been proven as fact, because every textbook, every magazine, every article, everything I read still says theory on it. And once something is no longer a theory, it's a fact, and then they take the theory word out of there. And even today, several years later, when I still read things about evolution, it still says theory in front of it. But the fact of Darwinian evolution has so deeply permeated the scientific community that anyone seemingly opposed to it is someone to be shunned. But evolution's a tricky word. Like I was saying, if we look at the definition of evolution, it's simply small changes developing over time. That's it. The terror occurs specifically in Darwinism, which is the belief that all species develop from one single-cell organism. Darwinism and evolution are not necessarily the same thing. There's that difference. We had a discussion that started before our Tuesday night young adult Bible study, where I said I actually do believe in evolution, specifically not Darwinian theory of evolution, evolution itself, small changes occurring over time. Why? Because that we can prove. They've dug up bodies from hundreds of years ago, and we know that they were a lot shorter than we are now. Okay, that's a change. The average height has increased. Can't argue that. We have an appendix. We have an organ in us that right now we don't even know it's there until it explodes. It serves no purpose for us really at this point in time. We have our bodies and our lifestyles have changed over the course of time to the point where we don't need it. So small changes occurring over time, that I believe in. Why? Because if God didn't build us with the ability to adapt to the environment, we would not still be here. The earth we live on is not the earth God created. With all the chemicals and all the pollution and all the ways that we have changed our environment and we've changed the world, if we were still exactly as we were created thousands and thousands of years ago, we couldn't survive. There's just no way. There's too much that's been changed by us. So my belief is that when God designed us, he designed us with the ability to adapt because he knew we were going to change our environment. So we've had to. So that I can believe in. If you go to any university, any scientific lab, anything, and talk to biologists and ask them about Darwinism or the Darwinian theory of evolution, they'll be the first to admit that it's got a lot of holes in it. Most of them will flat out tell you. The biggest hole is that Darwinism claims the origin of species. It was the title of his book. That's the major downfall. How can there be a theory about life without the origin of life itself? Yeah, that's right. If you've ever actually read through Darwin's theory, it shows how modern man came to be, but not where life originated from. There's kind of a big, if you're reading any other book and that information's left out, it's like, wow, it's a major plot hole. One of the most popular video documentaries in Darwinian science opens with the narrator with the big, bass booming voice that I can't do. He's talking about how Earth contained all the elements needed to sustain and begin life. And then he says, and I quote, "Perhaps the energy for it came from lightning, but whatever it was, caused a chain reaction that led to life." Whatever it was. Wow, how scientific. Maybe I am smart enough to be a scientist. Well, whatever it was, that's good enough. The scientific community long believed that life emerged by chance from primordial soup or ooze. However, no experiment has ever been able to replicate that. So, still just a theory. Some in the scientific community believe that life started on the backs of forming crystals. Non-living to living things on the backs of crystals. That sounds like a fantasy novel. But it's a scientific theory. Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick says life was seeded on Earth. So, aliens. Scientific theory. Life arising on its own requires 250 proteins minimum. These 250 proteins have to be organized in one very particular way. in order for it to be alive. The chances of that randomly happening are approximately 1 in 1 trillion, 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 trillion. That's 1 with 48 zeros after it. Something would have to skew nature to make that happen. There is no current science-based answer for the origin of life, but they will not study intelligent design. One cell, one living cell, more complicated than our most high-tech computers, just happened by chance? A cell is like nothing else we see in the physical world. These cells run on information, but information from where? Again, science doesn't know, but scientists agree that they need a source. Many scientists, including Richard Dawkins, whose name you might recognize because he was the author of The God Delusion, have moved from trying to explain Darwinism to flat out attacking religion. Richard Dawkins sat down with an interview with Ben Stein. Most of you probably know Ben Stein, at least recognize the name. He's a very monotone. He always wears a suit and sneakers because he's hip. He's been he's been a game show host. He's an economist. He played the psychologist in the movie Mask with Jim Carrey. He's Jewish, and he is a firm believer that there is a God, but he's also a believer that he likes science. He's kind of like, we're kind of alike in this way. While we're religious and we stand in our religious beliefs, we also appreciate the information that science brings forward. And Ben Stein sat down with an interview with Richard Dawkins and was trying to figure out why Richard Dawkins tries so hard, instead of working to explain the holes in his scientific beliefs, why he's moved to just attacking religion. And Dawkins just goes on this rant about anybody who's willing to believe or follow a religion and believe that it's a God must just be stupid or ignorant. And the best part about this interview, the reason why I like it so much is because Ben Stein keeps pushing on Dawkins all the way to the point where it's like, well, you have to explain where life came from. You have to explain where life came from, and gets Dawkins to the point where he admits that he could believe that an alien race seeded life on Earth, and that's where we came from. But he will not even contemplate there's a chance that there's a creator or a God, or go down the theory of intelligent design. But if aliens seeded us on Earth, that would still mean that we were intelligently designed because someone was behind us. And then B, if it was aliens, then where did they come from? Now you have to explain their life. Still didn't get yourself out of this hole. But so why all this anger and hatred towards religion and its connection with intelligent design? Scientists like Dawkins claim that religion leads to mass death and war, and that's why they dislike it so much. We all know about the Holy Wars, the Crusades, even 9/11, acts of men who use excerpts from their holy text to defend their actions. But what about excerpts like these? We civilized men, on the other hand, do our utmost to check the process of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. We institute poor laws, and our medical men exert their utmost skill to save the life of everyone to the last moment. There is reason to believe that vaccination has preserved thousands who, from a weak constitution, would formerly have succumbed to smallpox. Thus, the weak members of civilized societies propagate their kind. No one who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. It is surprising how soon a want of care, or care wrongly directed, leads to the degeneration of a domestic race. But, excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. Charles Darwin. The stronger must rule. It must not unite with the weaker, thus sacrificing its own stature. Only the born weakling can think this cruel, and that is why he is a weak and defective man. For if this law did not hold, any conceivable evolution of organic living things would be unthinkable. Adolf Hitler.
Read that again.
That second one?
Yeah.
The stronger must rule. It must not unite with the weaker, thus sacrificing its own stature. Only the born weakling can think this cruel, and that is why he is a weak and defective man. For if this law did not hold, any conceivable evolution of organic living things would be unthinkable. Very deeply tied into Charles Darwin's belief. Darwinism led to things like Nazism and even led to the practice of eugenics. In the 19-teens and 1920s, 50,000 people were unknowingly sterilized here in the United States in an attempt to try to keep under-average people from reproducing. So religion's the only thing that causes war? Science causes war. Can't the two things just work together? One of my favorite things that I love to do is find ways that science and the Bible overlap. And I have a list of some of my favorites. Job 26:7 is always one of my favorites because it says that God hangs the earth on nothingness. It is believed by many biblical scholars that Job is the oldest book in the Bible. And it says right there in Job that God hangs the earth on nothing. No other religious belief, practice, even science didn't think that the earth was literally hanging on nothing until, from this point, hundreds of years ago. It always had to be somewhere, whether it was being held up by somebody or on the back of a giant animal, there had to be something. Hebrews 11:3 talks about how everything's made up of just minuscule, tiny little pieces. Atoms were finally discovered in the 1800s. If you read Genesis, it talks about how God created us from the dust of the earth. Science has proven that there's nothing special in us. Everything that makes up our body can be found on the dust of the earth. Genesis 1-3, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. This is the only creation story that covers all four basic things that science says is needed for the earth and everything to start. You need time, space, matter, and energy. In the beginning, time, God created energy, the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. It's the only one that covers all four. And Job 38 talks about light being divided, which Newton discovered later, that you can actually divide light into the spectrum. And throughout the Bible, one of the things that's great is that it talks about God numbering the stars, naming all of the stars, and the vast number of stars. But the Bible never says that there is an infinite number of stars. It actually says that there's a finite number of stars. And that's something that we know to be true. To ancient people, there's no reason they wouldn't have believed that. It's just, oh, look at them all. You know, we can't comprehend that because we have so much light pollution, we can't see them all at this point. But you go back that far when there isn't any, oh, they must be infinite. Nope, God told them they weren't infinite. There's a finite number. That's what scientists understand now. Evolution can't explain things like emotions or music or art. Where does all that come from? So there's more besides just the fact that it doesn't quite explain where life itself came from. There's things that we do today that aren't quite explained through that either. The Bible and science can coexist. The Bible can even coexist with evolution. It's the Darwinian theory of things that doesn't make sense or that doesn't fit in. And this is the conversation that I've had with so many different people. Is because one of the things that always seems to throw people off is if I say something along the lines of, well, I believe in evolution. Oh, wait a minute. You go to church. Isn't that a no-no? I'm like, well, not if you understand what you're talking about. So, this was my conversation for the day. This was my talk for the day. One of the things that I was hoping to do was, just give, some information for, if and when you ever find yourselves in these situations where you're trying to defend and somebody throws out one of these things. It's like, you're thinking of the wrong thing. You believe in evolution? You think we came from monkeys? No. That's wrong. Go open your dictionary and read what evolution is, then come back and talk to me. There's a difference. So Mark and well, I don't know if Kate's coming back for music or not. You guys can come up. I'm also supposed to make sure we do offering. So I don't know. Yeah, let's do offering. Patrick, would you jump on that side? And then Matt, do you want to grab? There's one down here. I'll make you guys do it. So, so I hope this gave you guys some at least interesting information. That's what I aim for. And then next week, this is gonna be the first time where I do this type of thing 2 weeks in a row. Hope you guys can come back next week because I'm dragging Emma up here with me, which she's super excited about. So, not.
Thank you, Corey. I really appreciate it.